As the battle over the budget continues, another difficult issue for the government resurfaces internal Labor concerns over AUKUS. It was all hands on deck to defend the submarine plan, but not everyone's convinced, including our guest this morning, Greens Senator David Shoebridge. I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. The rise of One Nation has gripped politics this year, but right now the fate of the government's budget rests with the Greens. Changes to negative gearing and capital gains tax sailed through the House of Representatives on Thursday. It's now up to the Greens to decide whether and when they'll pass through the Senate, or if they'll join the coalition in an unlikely alliance. The minor party is threatening to hold up the tax changes as it fights cuts to the NDIS. On another front, the Greens are expressing more alarm over AUKUS after changes to the plan were revealed. Australia will now receive 3 in-service submarines from the United States rather than 2 old and 1 new. And it turns out the Greens aren't the only ones concerned.
The first cracks have officially appeared in the AUKUS deal.
Australia is now buying 3 second-hand Virginia-class submarines from the United States.
The original deal was for at least one of them to be new.
Our preference actually from the outset would have been to have in-service submarines.
If it is the case, as the Deputy Prime Minister says, that this will be cheaper and simpler, then why wasn't this the plan from the beginning?
At the outset, we were clearly working in with the schedules of the United States.
We won't have to deal with that initial run-in period for any new platform of this complexity where problems arise. That risk is being borne by the US system.
We're spending hundreds of billions of dollars on AUKUS, and the US is offering us 3 renovated second-hand clunkers.
Think about this as getting a second-hand Lamborghini that's being well serviced.
This is a train wreck. You have 3 like assets. It's a similar platform, similar maintenance, similar crewing requirements.
The most likely outcome is that we end up with no submarines at all.
Should we have said to the US, no, we don't want your second-hand subs?
That's what I would be saying, absolutely.
It's the underfunding of the Defence Force in AUKUS that's the real challenge we see right now.
An in-service submarine will be cheaper than a brand new submarine, so it will be more cost effective. But
how much cheaper is the question? I mean, again, there's a lot of unknowns here.
It is important that it remains in a classified realm.
As fears grow, the US is not building enough for its own needs.
MP Ed Husick calling on the ALP to rethink its support for the pact.
This deal has changed. It now gives us a moment to think about whether or not the deal should be reconfigured.
Mr Husick is entitled to his view.
There's one backbencher out of a caucus of about 120 who
has raised some questions.
Who's raised some questions.
AUKUS is happening.
I'm really concerned about the culture that exists at the moment in the party that you've seen, like I asked one question in one caucus meeting and I had all these ministers lined up this week to respond.
What we should be getting is 3 new submarines, and now we're getting trash instead.
These are the best attack submarines in the world.
Peter Garrett is leading a crowd-funded so-called AUKUS public inquiry.
Does AUKUS make us safer? Are there prudent alternatives?
Peter Garrett has predetermined views when it comes to nuclear-propelled submarines. I doubt it's going to give it a clean bill of health.
We are joined this week by Paul Sakkal, Chief Political Correspondent with the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, columnist with The Monthly, Karen Middleton, and columnist with the 9 newspapers, Waleed Aly. Very good morning to all of you. Paul, let's start with the change that we've seen on AUKUS before we get to the politics in it. Instead of 2 old and 1 new, we're now going to see Australia receive 3 in service, which sounds a lot nicer than the clunkers or the trash that we heard them referred to in the piece by some there. Bottom line, is this a good or a bad thing for Australia?
Well, first point to make is we're not getting, 20-year-old Yaris's from Rent-A-Bomb. These are best in the world submarines that are still better technology than Chinese submarines. So that's one point to make.
Overall, AUKUS and delivering it is going to be core to the government's ability to put itself forward as a serious party on defence and national security. Also a key test to ensure that, or to see if the Labor Party can resist the impulses of its rank and file. The Husic intervention was really important this week. It's the first MP to go public against AUKUS since Trump was inaugurated. There were flaws in his argument. It's based on the premise that the caucus voted on Virginia's. They actually voted on the principle of nuclear subs. There's a failure to grapple with the trade-offs of greater independence from the US among some of the advocates, which could lead to actually far greater defence spending. On the actual case this week, the government failed for days to make the case that the change in configuration of the Virginias was actually a good thing and what the government wanted all along. Goes to Husic's other core claim, which is that the government has failed on PR, doesn't make the strategic case, and there is a role here for the Prime Minister to step up and argue more forcefully.
Yeah, and we saw Richard Marles trying to do that during the week as well. But Karen, on what's happened here, this is not a fundamental change in the direction of AUKUS at all, but is it a reminder that we are at the whim of what the US decides to do?
Absolutely. To the substance, it isn't just a question about the age of the submarines. The second-hand ones, the in-service ones, will be between 6 and 15 years old, and the lifespan is 33 years, so a new one would be, have the whole lifespan. There are also going to be different versions of the Virginia, so the new one that we would have been getting would have had between 12 and... It would have had 40 missile tubes on it. The older version that we will now get will only have 12. So it will have a firepower difference as well. But I think the question that it raises, aside from, the substance of the capability, is what does this say about that the United States is making its decisions based on US interests, not on our interests? If this is really what we wanted all along, we never said that. Our government never said that at the time. It reminds me of that police, in cop shows, reading the rights to a suspect and saying, if you do not disclose something now, it may harm your defence in court if you try to rely on it later. And they're doing that.
But isn't it also possible that, as the government says, they may have wanted this originally to have the one standard Virginia sub for all three, but the fact the US was giving us Virginia subs at all, they've never done this with anyone. They had to fit in with what they were willing to do at the time.
Yes, but the other interesting thing is, if you look, the Congressional Research Service, which is the Congress's equivalent of the Parliamentary Library, although quite prestigious, does regular research reports to Congress on AUKUS. And for the last couple of years, and certainly in the most recent one in January, it provides a potential alternative scenario, which involves the United States selling us no submarines. Instead of
This is what Malcolm Turnbull talks about, isn't it?
He does, and in fact, it's there in print. It goes into quite some detail. We could do this. We could not sell them any. We could base all of the 8 submarines, retain ownership, base them all in Australia and do all the submarining work for Australia, and they could then invest all that money in other capabilities and they could do missions for us as well as them.
That is definitely not the optimal pathway
for
Australia.
It also would activate, I think, the people who are worried about sovereignty and self-reliance, because it would much more integrate the two forces.
Could I just make the point in rebuttal to that? Sorry, I know you're about to go to Waleed, but the government internally says that, and I'm making the government's points here partly because they're not willing to make it themselves and that's their own failure.
Yeah.
But they say that this decision last week, after a long period of confusion about whether the Trump administration would proceed with AUKUS, a Colby review led by a Pentagon skeptic who might have actually wanted to can AUKUS. The US is now behind the scenes pinpointing the exact Virginias we might get in the later part of the 2030s.
So it's a positive sign.
They say that far from this being a big moment of doubt, this actually confirms that despite some bumps in the road, this is the first sign from the US that they are specifying the optimal pathway. And on this question of Plan B, the government does have a Plan B if we don't get the Virginias. It is to proceed with trying to build the AUKUS subs in the 2040s and fill in the gap with Collins class. There is no shift in for the government.
It's a long stretch for the Collins class.
And the messaging has not been good.
Let me come to you. Terrible. The whole AUKUS debate, and it allowed that to resurface this week. There are some well-known critics who re-emerged as well. Yep. Is this really a proxy for a bigger debate about the sort of foreign policy position Australia wants?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. I mean, we're talking endlessly about these Virginia-class subs. What we never seem to explain to the public when we talk about this, I think we just take it as understood, but I don't think it is that that's just the transitional step to the AUKUS sub, which is meant to come in. So, we're only meant to have them really filling a gap that's about maybe a decade, maybe a bit less than that. Question is whether the AUKUS subs get built on time anyway, and there's all sorts of problems because they're being built.
Because the timelines always hold.
Yeah, exactly, and that's an issue, and they're being designed in the UK, and that's apparently not going very well, and they'd be built here, and like there's all this sort of stuff. But the bottom line is, and there's all these other aspects of AUKUS we never talk about to do with, sort of co-development of artificial intelligence and quantum technology and all this stuff we don't talk about. So actually what AUKUS is a big strategic decision.
Well, even before the Virginias, it's the rotation from next year of British and American submarines through Australia, through the bases in Australia.
Yeah, that's right. So, we're expanding it. We're doing up airfields and all sorts of stuff that's going on. What this is really about is a pact to more deeply integrate the three nations.
Correct.
Now, I don't want to overstate this. They're already deeply integrated. We are deeply integrated with the US already. We are reliant on the US for our weaponry already. There's all sorts of defence sharing. The idea that we go from a position of relative independence to one of total dependence is not correct. But it's just that the integration becomes so much more thorough. And then the question becomes, well, all right, do we want to do this at a time where the US is, let's just call it a bit erratic? We have China emerging, they're our biggest trading partner. There could be increased tensions between mummy and daddy, and what are we going to do when they start fighting? And so I think there's a whole lot of anxiety about our geopolitical decision-making, about where our alliances sit and where they should sit. Unfortunately, the Trump administration becomes a huge disruptor in this whole conversation because everyone now, not everyone, a lot of people now look at the United States through the prism of the Trump administration. But of course, barring some miraculous change to the Constitution or a coup, he will not be the president. So then the question is, how baked in is Trumpism in America? So what I'm saying in all this is, we're talking about submarines. Submarines are not the issue. The issue is actually, who does Australia want to be?
Are we tying ourselves more to the United States?
Right. Now, there are arguments we should.
Yep.
There are arguments we shouldn't, but we're not having that debate because it's almost like it's too big a debate for us to.
But on the debate we saw,
want us to have that debate.
Well,
that's part of the problem.
On the debate that we did see, though, Ed Husic going public. There are some others in the caucus who share his concerns but aren't going public. My sense, though, is it's not a big number. Definitely a bigger number in the rank and file Labor Party membership, and we'll see what happens at the Labor Party conference next month. But it's pretty clear at the top, they're not for turning on this from the Prime Minister down. How would you describe, Paul, the level of Labor unease about AUKUS?
If I had to put an estimate on it, I'd say it's a minority, but a significant minority of sceptics within the caucus on AUKUS. And within the broader community, I mean, you're about to speak to Senator David Shoebridge. As Waleed says, the Trump administration is creating a huge level of concern around the alliance. So this is a growing sentiment, which is feeding the rank and file, the union movement, some elements of the caucus. The Husic intervention has most particularly annoyed the more progressive MPs in inner city seats against the Greens, who have raised concerns or questions about AUKUS internally, but are now going to be compared with Husic in their electorates. On the union movement, there's a Labor conference in July where there's an attempt from the ministers involved to shut down debate. If there is a debate on the conference floor, this was resolved in 2023.
The unions are split themselves.
The unions are quite split themselves. One of the key union activists against AUKUS, Tim Kennedy, just lost an election in the UWU. Marcus Strom, the Labor for War activist in Sydney, lost his bid to actually become a delegate. So if you talk to the ministers involved, they say that there is much less of a groundswell than appears in public on this matter inside Labor.
Just quickly on this Ed Husic factor, Karen, he's spoken out on a whole bunch of issues, gas, AI. Look, there's quite a list, and AUKUS now as well. And we saw the defence from various ministers say, no, we're going to stick with it. He went on afternoon briefing with PK on Thursday and expressed this view that, well, Labor should be allowed to have more. We should have more free debate about these things. We shouldn't be so rigid. I understand he felt pretty angered that there was this suggestion floating around that he was about to jump ship and go to the Greens, which he's not going to do.
I wouldn't think so.
No,
never heard that.
No, but what's that dynamic like there at the moment? Should there be more free debate? Is it too
Well, I think this is
controlled at the moment.
This is the subtext here that, you know, the more you seek to control the caucus and not have breakouts, the more you risk people getting anxious and there being this sense that nobody else's view is important. And I think the government could manage this dissent on this issue if they were managing the communications about it a lot better. And on this issue, on the AUKUS issue, you know, they've got a tricky relationship with the United States to manage, but if you end up looking like you're more focused on managing that relationship than you are on keeping the public informed, then you need to reassure the public on this, and I think you need to reassure the caucus. And if you're not having debate and allowing people's views to be and then answering them, you risk that sense, that lack of assurance and a frustration that blows out on other issues.
But it goes right back to the start for Labor. This is the problem. We woke up and AUKUS was there.
Yeah.
And then Labor agreed within 24 hours. It wasn't taken to the caucus. There was no... So clearly, the idea of Labor solidarity works, that you caucus, you come out and you present a unified front. But if you haven't caucused in the first place, that starts to break down.
And to be fair to them, it was in the lead up to an election, and they took a very fast decision.
There are political elements to this, but ever since then, there's been this unease. It's kind of like, well, we didn't really sign up to this. Ed Husick can say there should be more debate.
They did at the following Labor conference.
Yeah,
but that was managed
2 years
as well.
They're always managed.
Yeah.
They're always managed.
They had a debate at the conference, but on AUKUS and a bunch of other really critical matters, Labor's caucus and Labor's general party machine is a debate-free zone. If the Prime Minister believes in AUKUS, and he does, he could use his 94-seat mandate to make the case forcefully. There is a role there. That's how public persuasion works.
He's using that mandate on a few fronts at the moment. All right, well, time to talk to Greens Senator David Shoebridge. First, here was the Defence Minister explaining why he thinks Australia needs nuclear-powered submarines.
Our most consequential strategic risk is not so much that the continent is invaded, but it is that we would be coerced by any potential adversary in the future, and you only need to look at the closure of that significant sea lane being the Strait of Hormuz to understand what it might look like if we had coercion there.
David Shoebridge, welcome to the program.
Yeah, good to be here.
So do you agree with the Minister there that the greatest strategic threat that Australia faces is not so much being invaded directly, it's the threat to our sea lanes, to the closure of those sea lanes?
Well, I think the greatest strategic risk Australia faces at the moment is losing our sovereignty and not having critical decisions made about our defence, about what we should be doing to protect us, not having them made here in Canberra, but being decided in Washington and then just imposed upon us. And we saw that, you know, in the very recent past, where a critical decision about apparently one of our most important weapons systems was foisted upon us after Washington decided we weren't going to get a new Virginia-class submarine, we're going to get 3 second-hand ones. So,
and I'll come to that, but how do you feel about the build-up of China's military, its increasing assertiveness in the region, the threat that might pose to those sea lanes that we rely on so heavily?
Well, I mean, when we talk about our relationship with China is a trade relationship and increasingly a people-to-people relationship with China.
You don't see any sort of threat?
Well, I think we should see China's rise as China doing what's in China's national interests. And we shouldn't have rose-tinted glasses on it, but nor should we just adopt Washington's view about what
what's
China
your
is
view?
doing.
So if you don't have rose-tinted glasses, what's your view? How should we look at what China is doing to its neighbours and in the region?
Well, I think we should have a very realistic view about China. We should see that it's building its military force. We should see that it's obviously going to have a significant capacity to deliver military force in and around its region in the South China Sea. We should have a frank and honest relationship with them about human rights and trade. And we should be looking at what our region is doing, which is trying to come up with a balanced approach to China and not go down a warpath with Washington. The warpath with Washington is one of the most dangerous responses we can have to the growing of a significant regional power who's having complex relations with countries in our region.
Sure.
We should have a complex relationship with China, but it shouldn't be entirely managed through Washington's war plans.
Bottom line, do you think there is any danger of those sea lanes being closed?
Well, I think when you look at any nation that has a significant military, they can exercise that military in their national interest.
So that is something Australia should think about or not?
But why would China shut down the sea lanes linking Australia and China, which delivers critical and essential materials into the Chinese economy? I mean,
so you don't think it's a risk?
Well, I think if there was a conflict between the US and China, well, then indeed global trade is at risk. And I think we should be very frank about that. If there is a significant conflict between the US and China, well, then not only are sea lanes at risk, our entire region is at risk and the world's economy is at risk.
I mean, the reason I ask is because this goes to whether we need nuclear-powered submarines or indeed any submarines at all. Do you think we need some sort of capability to keep those sea lanes or help keep those sea lanes open?
Well, I think when you look at our National Defence Plan, the most recent National Defence Plan says, well, we are a globally trading nation. We trade across the world. We have trade links to the Middle East, we have trade links to Europe, we have trade links to North America, we have trade links in the region, and therefore we need a military which will defend those trade links anywhere across the planet.
So that includes submarines?
Yeah, but that is a ridiculous proposal for our military, to defend global trade links when we're an economy the size of Australia. Singapore has global trade links.
But what about the trade links in our region? The trade links, the sea lanes we rely on, do we need to be able to defend those?
We definitely need to be able to defend our maritime approaches. We need to be able to defend continental Australia. We need to be able to defend our air and sea domain. But the idea that an economy the size of Australia can have a global policing role on sea lanes...
Maybe not
a
global policing role, but a role in our region, whether it's the Strait of Malacca or the South China Sea. You don't see a role for Australia there?
I see a role for us working with our neighbours to try and prevent global conflicts shutting down trade links in our regions. But you see, the reason why our defence strategy says we have global trade and therefore we need to be able to project force globally, and that's what Labor says, the reason they do that is because then they say, well, the only answer to this proposal, if we've got global trade and need to be able to project power globally, the only answer is, oh, Washington. We must be a bit part of Washington's global military power projection.
I'm just more interested in your position right now. So that is, you don't think Australia needs any capability to help keep open those sea lanes that we rely on?
I think we need a capability, and we should be focusing on a capability to defend Australia, to defend Australia's maritime approaches, to work with our neighbours
because you
and our
think
region.
The risk of an attack on Australia is greater?
No, I think what is our defence? What should our defence strategy be with the modest resources Australia has? You know, we're not a global superpower. We're not here in order to keep open the Strait of Hormuz. We're not here to keep open the Strait of Malacca, because the Strait of Malacca is thousands of kilometres from our shore, and it's beyond our capacity militarily to do that.
Right.
Unless we say, well, we're just going to be a bit player in a US military force in the region, and that's what Labor has signed up to, and I don't think that's a sovereign military force.
So if the priority is, as you say, defending the approaches to Australia, do we need submarines at all?
Well, submarines might be one option, but I'll tell you one thing we don't need. We don't need nuclear power submarines, because the only rationale for nuclear power submarines is to project force thousands and thousands of kilometres from our shore, and in this case, the whole focus for AUKUS is for us to have, at some potential point, a handful of nuclear submarines that are part of a much bigger US deployment off the coast of China.
Okay,
that's what you need nuclear submarines for, not to defend Australia.
If you've said submarines are an option, you're not sure whether we need submarines, or do you think, do we or don't we need submarines?
Well, I think the question of very expensive, vulnerable crewed submarines is an open question in defence circles. Do you need uncrewed?
What do you think?
Well, I mean, it's not my job to work out the portfolio purchases in defence, but I think...
Really? You're not sure if we need submarines? It's not your role to...
Well, crewed submarines. Do we need a next generation of crewed submarines? I think that should be something we're having an open debate about.
So you're not sure yourself?
Should we have crewed submarines? Yes. Should we have uncrewed submersibles? Should we have a mixture of that?
What do you think?
Well, I think probably we should be looking at a mixture of different weapons platforms to defend Australia and not project force thousands of kilometres from our shores, and that is the core issue.
Okay, so including crewed submarines?
Well, we should be looking at the options, whether they are crewed submarines, whether they are unmanned submersibles, but fundamentally, it's a totally different ballgame if you're talking about defending Australia, which could be done with far more modest resources, with a very different force projection in our region than if
though,
you're joining a US war against China. And I can tell you one thing, nuclear submarines are a disaster on pretty much every front. Why are we inviting ourselves to a US war with China by buying these weapons platforms and making our defence force an interoperable part of the US?
But do you accept that underwater drones simply cannot do, at the moment at least, what a nuclear-powered submarine can do, either with speed, endurance, its ability to stay submerged for very long times, and they can't carry the weapons that a submarine can?
Absolutely. An underwater drone launched from Australia couldn't be part of a US war against China in the South China Sea. You're pushing against an open door, David. I don't think we should be buying exquisitely expensive US weapons platforms to invite ourselves to someone else's knife fight.
But in terms
that's
of defending
ridiculous.
Australia, as you've said is the priority, do you really think underwater drones can do the job?
Well, what I've said is underwater drones, potentially crewed submarines, different weapons platforms designed for a defensive purpose. And if you look at the war in Ukraine, you look at what's happening in the Gulf, what countries are able to do is to deny regions to an opponent. It's an area deniability, right? And that is a far more achievable goal than imposing force, projecting force against an adversary thousands of kilometres from your shore. It's a far more achievable goal, and it's what our defence force, with our industrial capacity, with our economic capacity, should be focused on defending Australia.
We are a little bit different to some of those conflicts in that we are an island continent and that seaborne trade is very important. If we are going to have some sort of crewed submarine, I want to show you this. The Collins-class submarines that have been in operation since the late 1990s, they're due to be retired start to be retired in about 10 years from now. Those US Virginia-class submarines come in from 2032, and then eventually those AUKUS submarines from the early 2040s. If we ditched AUKUS, if we dropped the whole thing and we no longer had those Virginia-class subs or those AUKUS subs, what do we do to replace the Collins-class submarines?
Well, I mean, if you wanted to get conventionally powered, perhaps with air-independent propulsion submarines, there are multiple global vendors which could guarantee the production of submarines and have them in the water.
Do you think, honestly?
Absolutely. You look at the Japanese shipyards, you look at the Korean shipyards, you look at Scandinavian, Swedish shipyards.
They're largely backlogged, aren't they?
There have been multiple opportunities for Australia.
In years gone by.
Well, and they remain far more viable than a sort of rolling the dice and hoping that son of Trump in the early 2030s will give us a second-hand Virginia-class submarine when we know from all of the evidence that their production rates will not produce a surplus and they are highly unlikely to be available to us. So if you were looking at the world's... You say this, OK, look at the world's submarine production capacity. Where are we most likely to get submarines if that was your goal? The one place you would not go to, you would just reject out of hand, would be the US submarine, nuclear submarine production yards, because they have no chance of doing it.
Well, they've just committed to the 3 Virginias again in the 2030s. You think we'd get them from Japan within 10 years?
Well, we could. There are multiple vendors that actually produce submarines and produce them for export. The one country that doesn't is the US, and that's where we're going.
The US have said they'll give us these 3 subs in the 2030s. Have Japan or Korea said they can provide submarines at all?
The US has not said that. The US has passed a law that says they can only provide us with these second-hand clunkers if they have a certificate from the Secretary of Navy that they have more than enough to meet their own needs and they're spare. And then the US president in the early 2030s signs a certificate and gives it to Congress and says, giving Australia these second-hand submarines will in no way interfere with our own capacity.
You're right to point to those caveats.
That is a very different thing.
No, you're right to point to those caveats.
Than suggesting we have some guarantee.
But just one more before we leave this whole issue. Is there any sort of suggestion from Japan or Korea that they would be able to make submarines for us in that time frame?
Well, they have previously actively bid to us.
Years ago.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the key problems with this debate is, yes, all of those other options are difficult, but if you wanted to get submarines, any of those options is possible. And in the AUKUS debate, right, the Virginia-class submarines, there is no possible pathway that they will be producing a surplus, and that even puts to one side the plain insanity of relying upon the UK industrial base, which is in a complete meltdown when it comes to nuclear submarines, these AUKUS submarines. The UK Audit Office has said 4 years in a row now that the UK have no capacity to build the nuclear reactor for AUKUS. It will not be produced, will not happen. Why aren't we having that debate? Because AUKUS, you know, this SSN AUKUS, is a genuine fantasy, a fantasy even beyond the idea that we'll get second-hand Virginias.
Let's move on to the budget. Has the government offered the Greens a longer inquiry into its NDIS cuts in return for you passing their tax changes?
Well, I haven't seen an offer to that effect, but I'll tell you one thing we do want is we do want far greater scrutiny on the NDIS. You know, tens of billions of dollars being taken away from families, from people who desperately rely upon that to have basic quality of life. And we are absolutely committed to getting a longer inquiry. I mean, we saw the Coalition and Labor and One Nation join together to do this, you know, ridiculously short inquiry.
Yeah, I think it's June 16. It's due to report, which is, late next week.
Yeah, and there's no way that you can get to the bottom of the impacts of taking tens of billions of dollars of support away from people in an inquiry that time. We are committed to doing what we can to extend that inquiry and actually use that time to unwind some of these brutal attacks that Labor's proposing on NDIS.
And on the capital gains tax and negative gearing changes, are you willing to pass those with a short inquiry by the timeframe the government wants, by July 2?
Well, I mean, we have an inquiry in the field and we want to see what happens with that inquiry into the CGT and capital gains and negative gearing. And of course, what's different about the NDIS and the capital gains tax is this Parliament's already had a lengthy inquiry into capital gains tax, you know, led by a Greens motion and chaired by a Green to actually look at the evidence base for a winding back capital gains tax. Now, all of that evidence is available, and what that says is, if you read the evidence, and I'd urge the government to, that you need to do far more than what the government is proposing in this legislation.
So if there's already been that inquiry, do you just need to vote for the capital gains tax and negative gearing changes?
Well, we need this inquiry that is actually looking at the government's legislative proposals. Now we've finally got them. We do need that inquiry to run its course. And I can tell you this, we are putting as much pressure as we can to wind back some of these incredibly generous tax concessions that property investors has. Like Labor's proposal with this budget bill is that everybody who already owns property, whether they have 5, 10 or 100 investment properties, they keep all of their tax benefits. And young, particularly, you know, young people, renters, people with nothing, they get absolutely nothing out of this budget. So, and if we want to have a revenue stream to make that happen, the Greens took to the last election, and we're going to be fighting for in the next few weeks or months to ensure that we limit grandfather into one investment property.
Would you do a deal with the Coalition to string out the inquiries into both the taxes and the NDIS?
Well, I mean, you talk about doing a deal because that puts it in a kind of political frame, but we are looking at two pieces of legislation. The NDIS, which has this fundamentally broken internal proposal from Labor to put these massive cuts on people who need service. We are pressing on that because we absolutely care. Well, I can't tell you how many people have contacted my office about how fearful they are about the cuts. So we're doing that with the NDIS. And when it comes to capital gains tax and negative gearing, we're looking at that on its merits too. And you know, young people have been, again, contacting my office and asking, well, you know, how does Labor produce a budget that keeps tax lurks for people with 100 investment properties and they don't give 1 red cent to renters? No additional investment in social or public housing. It's like, you know, an older generation has had all the benefits. You know, Anthony Albanese, free university, his generation, all these benefits, and they're literally pulling the ladder up behind them.
David Shoebridge, thanks so much for joining us today.
Good speaking.
Coming up, Barnaby's fumble over One Nation's housing policy. Just as polls show, the party's popularity is on the rise. First, let's get back to our panel. We're joined once more by Chief Political Correspondent for The Age and Sydney Morning Herald, Paul Sakkal, columnist with The Monthly, Karen Middleton, and Waleed Aly, columnist with the 9 newspapers. All right, so let's back onto AUKUS, Paul, before we get onto the budget. Clearly, the Greens opposed to any sort of nuclear-powered submarine and very sceptical that Trump or the son of Trump would give us one of these Virginia-class submarines down the line. But is beneath all of that the issue that there is a very different view of the sort of threats we're facing in the region?
Well, of course. I mean, David Shoebridge is one of the most effective Greens operators in the parliament, but I think that interview, which I thought was fantastic, does show that it's much easier to criticise AUKUS, which is this gargantuan program that has, doubt surrounding it, than it is to actually grapple with the trade-offs of, well, if we don't want to be coerced by the superpower in our region, how do we go about defending ourselves? Those questions are really difficult, and the government's in the middle of this storm arguing for a difficult program. But yeah, as you've said, David Shoebridge exemplifies the anti-US sentiment that exists in the community.
Let's turn to the budget and the questioning at the end there about whether there's going to be, he doesn't like the phrase deal with the coalition, but are they both going to agree, Karen, to extend the inquiries into both the NDIS and the budget tax changes, frustrating the government's timeline here?
Well, it sounds like a deal between the Coalition and the Greens is possible. The Coalition is saying we'll back an NDIS extended inquiry if you back an extended tax inquiry. We know the Greens are keen for an extended NDIS inquiry in particular. That's what they've been focused on. I think the question is, and the suggestion is that this may occur, that whether the government will agree to an NDIS inquiry, give the Greens what they're asking for to avoid them doing this.
What do you think? Do you reckon they'll do that? Let's have a longer NDIS inquiry. It'll delay the start of some of their NDIS changes?
Yeah, you'd have to think that it's on the cards. I mean, at the moment, they're staring the Greens down. I think they're hoping that the Greens will fold in the end because they're worried about being seen to stand in the way of change. And that's gone badly for the Greens on some issues in the past. But it is a staring contest now.
It's the classic lesser of two evils here, isn't it, for the government? Do you string out the NDIS changes a little longer and at least get off the table the capital gains tax backlash that they're copying?
Well, the tax issue has been the more problematic one politically since the budget. So you would have to think that they might be focused on trying to get that one through, and maybe they might have to make some kind of sacrifice to do that.
Yeah. What do you think? Does it sound to you like that's where they'll land? Give the Greens a little longer on the NDIS?
Yeah, and they're in an interesting position because, OK, there's heat and they've got these inquiries that people want and so on, but at the same time, there is no way in the world the Coalition can vote against the NDIS changes. It would just destroy their credibility. And there's no real way that the Greens can oppose the tax changes, ultimately.
Well, that would mean they could stare them both down.
Yeah, well, they might be able to. I mean, well, no, I think there'll be an extension to the NDIS inquiry. That's pure, I don't know, but that would be my guess. Because Karen's absolutely right. The political heat is far more on the tax stuff. And the only way through for the government, it seems to me, apart from, the various consultations and whatever changes they might make, tweaks, I think is the right word, that they might make, they have to get it legislated and they have to do it really soon because the whole political debate changes once this becomes a fact rather than it becomes a proposal. And that was the big thing that did for Tony Abbott's budget in 2014. It just never got through the parliament and just became this. That would be a total disaster for Labor. So I think whatever trading they have to do to make that happen, they'll do.
And to be clear, that's not to downplay the anxiety in the disability community about what they're doing. There is genuine anxiety about what they're doing and how it's going to work.
And they deserve some scrutiny on that.
Absolutely, yeah. I just think the government is very focused on the political heat on the other stuff.
Well, I mean, Karen Barlow had a great story in the Saturday paper yesterday too about the increasing use of automation in decision-making in the NDIS as part of the changes that they're making here. So
yeah,
that's
sort of moving across government.
Yeah, it needs to be looked at.
And worth just saying on the inquiry on the tax stuff, this is one of the biggest changes to the tax system in decades. The government says it's reform that it is proud of and that is productivity enhancing and that it wants to talk about, yet it's allowing only a 2-day inquiry on changes that it didn't consult on before the budget. So that's a sign that they are scared of the debate and they've been rounded on by the Teals, by the Greens, by the Coalition, by every business group you can think of. That's not how parliamentary processes should work.
It also sets up this really weird process where they pass legislation that's kind of a shell that doesn't have the kernel in it. And then after they pass the legislation, well, they haven't passed it, you know what I mean, got through that. After they've done that, now we'll do the consultation bit. It's a very strange, it's all a bit backwards.
It's something the coalition governments did a lot. They used what we call Henry VIII clauses to pass a shell and then put stuff in afterwards that couldn't be changed. But it's not a good idea. Now, the regulations that they're proposing to put in would be disallowable in the Parliament, but it's following practice. That's
the Senate can vote to stop them.
That's right.
Look, much of the debate, though, when it comes to this constant budget debate that's been underway now for 3 or 4 weeks, much of it over the last week turned to housing in particular, but not everyone had their lines straight.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese standing by his government's controversial tax changes If anyone out there thinks that the housing market is working, then they're bonkers.
The tax changes do seem to be having some impact in the established dwellings.
A good thing or a bad thing that house prices are actually going down?
What we want to see is sustainable growth over the long term.
Australians are looking for authentic leadership. They're over the bullshit. And the honest truth is that house prices in this country are too high for young people and they should go down.
No! I'd like to see market prices be at the market rate.
We need to see affordability improve, and that's a combination of increasing wages and moderated house price growth.
We want to see more houses built, because if you have more houses built, you'll have lower prices by definition.
We want Australians to be in a house.
One Nation has had to issue a please explain
over its plan to block foreign citizens from owning a home.
Does it apply to permanent residents as well?
Well, it does.
No, it doesn't. OK, Barnaby, you have a change of policy.
On further investigation and discussions with One Nation, no, we are not going to be kicking permanent residents out of their house.
Clarify what One Nation's housing policy is.
Yeah, housing policy. Can you just be more specific on that question, please?
Pauline Hanson posting that temporary visa holders and foreign citizens living abroad would be given 2 years to sell their property to an Australian.
If after 2 years they don't sell that property, are you going to kick them out of the house?
Look, it's a fair question to ask.
So what's the answer?
Our policies are so clear.
Have you got a view on that, Bridget?
I could have a view if I knew what One Nation's view was.
If their policy is to kick people out of their homes, I think that should set off alarm bells.
We will not be asking permanent residents who have purchased and own homes in Australia to sell those homes.
People think the economy isn't working for them and they're working their guts out. I tell you what, they will turn to more simplistic, grievance-based politics.
Oh, well, give me a break. This is not a budget about fighting populism.
And that is the context in which my government is saying, no, we're going to deliver real change for the better.
So we'll come to One Nation and what happened with their housing policy confusion. But just on the point the Prime Minister was making there at the end there, Waleed, that what he's doing on housing is about addressing this rise in populism. It's about changing the status quo to fix the frustration people have with being unable to get into the housing market. Do you think he's got a point there? Is this about populism?
I do think that's the intention. I don't know that it's delivering on it yet, and it might take a long time. This is a problem that incumbents have, is anything they do that might be dealing with structural disenchantment, let's call it that, that takes a long time. The populist response is immediate. And so it takes a very long time to reset those things. But the other problem with the budget, if it was aiming at doing that, is, I guess David Shoebridge kind of made this point, it's not giving anyone anything. So if, for example, they'd matched some of the tax stuff on the housing, let's just confine it to housing, if they'd matched that with income tax cuts beyond a $250 watto, then there's a narrative to sell that people might be able to latch onto. They needed some kind of narrative that would challenge that would say something fundamental is changing here. We're changing the alignment. Said that in the budget speech, but they didn't then go on and do it. And so the fact that we've seen One Nation continue to rise after the budget, there's a lot of discontent. None of it's going to the coalition, by the way, all going to One Nation. That, in a way, is not a huge surprise.
It's interesting the way Anthony Albanese is positioning this, selling this as a response to populism, though, because there is a counter view, and it's being put by the former Labor advisor, Lachlan Harris. He's been critical of what the government's doing on the capital gains tax. He started a number of businesses successfully. He's very concerned about what this capital gains tax change will do, and makes the point, in fact, to David Lipson on the Insiders on Background podcast here, that this is going to narrow Labor's base. Have a look.
I don't think that is a great strategy, particularly given what's happening in the world around the rise of populist parties. It's narrowing Labor's appeal at the very, very moment when we need to broaden it.
Yeah, it's an interesting point that this is going to turn away young people who have an entrepreneurial dream, for example. Karen, what do you think?
Well, there are the people now saying on negative gearing, oh, well, you're shutting the door for us, we'll never be able to do it. And the government says we'll be able to do it on new properties. So there's that. And then I think they've they've obviously had a lot more pushback on the other aspects of the capital gains tax thing than they ever anticipated, and they've been struggling to manage all of that. So I think they have, you know, they haven't done terribly well on this, and they're trying to tidy it up later. And on the populism thing, it's sort of like a Labor Party inside thought, really. And what it means is there was a huge amount of pressure on the government coming through in focus group testing by a whole lot of people, that people expect them to change something substantive. They want the system overturned and changed. And so the government is responding to that pressure, because if they don't respond to that pressure, they are concerned that people will say, well, up yours, I'm going to vote for someone who says they have, you know, who reflects my grievance.
There is still that view within the government that had they not done anything, they'd be in an even worse position. But look, we'll never know.
But there is a problem in that, like, when you have grievance building up, you know, it's coming from all directions. So everyone wants something to change, but no one can agree on what the change should be. So when the change happens, people then get angry about that. So we're moving in. One of the reasons we're here is a long-range thing, but we are in a situation where what we really have in Australian politics, and around the world we're seeing it, is a majority of dissent. It's not a majority of assent. And so it's very difficult to construct a policy to which people will assent. It's
a really interesting framing, actually. There's this disagreement about what to do.
Everyone's angry about everything.
Now, let's get to One Nation, Paul, and we'll come to your interview with Pauline Hanson in a minute too. But on the housing front, we saw it there, Barnaby Joyce having to clean up the position, Sean Bell as well from One Nation. What happened? This is about whether permanent migrants who aren't citizens should be kicked out of their homes.
Yeah, a week of paradoxes for One Nation. I mean, the first days of the week, Sunday and Monday, were dominated by Pauline Hanson saying she could be the Prime Minister. Monday, a poll which showed for the first time that One Nation had gone ahead of Labor, which really shattered the assumption of the coalition that the discontent around the budget would feed to a higher coalition primary vote. It's all fed into One Nation because, as Waleed says, people see the whole establishment as not giving them a good go, and so they're going to the outsider. So as the week went on, it became a bit messier for One Nation. As you say, David, Barnaby Joyce, on I think it was Wednesday or Thursday night, in an interview with Andrew Bolt on Sky News, mishandled a policy, didn't know whether a housing policy would lead to permanent residents being forced to sell their homes. He took a few phone calls off air and then came back to Andrew Bolt and clarified. And he's just texted you and I think we're allowed to say this. He says that there was no policy written down on the website. He was going off what Pauline said verbally, and so this was difficult for him.
And just on that, right, so if this was the problem, and you can sort of appreciate it, it's not an easy one to answer in an interview if you're just going off something Pauline Hanson has said rather than a policy they've agreed on. That kind of speaks to the problem here, doesn't it? That they've got to formulate policies as a group, agree on them, and then go out and sell them.
Well, it raises up the broader debate about whether One Nation has the systems and personnel and policy in place to be either the official opposition or the government. And there's now lots of evidence piling up that there is extremism in One Nation's ranks, admitted by Pauline Hanson in the podcast I think you're about to play, that there's clearly issues over policy, that there's, senators like Malcolm Roberts questioning whether the Bondi massacre was a false flag. None of this is getting cut through because we live in this social media algorithm age where Pauline Hanson's straight talking is dominating the airwaves, and some of these flaws and the coalition's arguments are barely even entering the public domain. But the hope is, among Labor and coalition people, that over time there's attrition, that some of these flaws become exposed, and the novelty of Pauline for PM wanes.
And I think that's a good way of putting it, because sure, messiness on this, and we can guess, I suppose, as to what impact that's going to have, or whether the people who are supporting Pauline Hanson are going to care at all that there's a bit of confusion around the policy detail. But is this the growing pains that we're going to see more of, that rising popularity, the rising scrutiny, more of this stuff?
The pressure will increase on One Nation because they haven't ever been thought of as a party of government before. And in saying they could be the government, or, Pauline Hanson saying I could be the Prime Minister, people then start to think of them differently. They think, oh, hang on, do I want a government run by One Nation? And they then have to do that work because they're playing on the same ground as the major parties. And it's interesting to me the way Pauline Hanson answered that question about do you want to be Prime Minister?
Well, let's show that. Just pause there, because this was Pauline Hanson's comment to Paul on your Inside Politics podcast on, this nuance about whether she wants to be PM or not.
Didn't say want to run. I said if I am put in that position, I believe that I have the ability to be able to do the job. So there's a hell of a difference.
there's a hell of a difference.
Yeah, I thought that was...
Why the distinction?
Well, it's an interesting insight. And she also repeatedly said to Paul and elsewhere, we're a major party, we're not a minor party, I'm the leader. There's this sort of impression coming through that she feels like people don't take her seriously, that she feels like people don't think she's up to it. So she was asked, do you want to be Prime Minister? And she answered, well, I could be because I'm good enough, which is, I just think, interesting.
But is this Waleed wanting to hold on to that outsider thing that's obviously working well for One Nation and not wanting to be seen as a party of government necessarily?
Yeah, well, there was reported during the week that Barnaby Joyce was a bit upset about the Pauline for PM idea because that totally changes the game. So yes, the fundamental situation is that One Nation is in a strong position as long as it's playing by different rules to the major parties. If they're an insurgent, then they're judged in totally different ways. Things like policy missteps, none of that matters. So we've got 2 years till the election. The only real political question becomes, does the game change for them? And I'm not convinced it necessarily will. I think there's this idea that once there's more scrutiny and so on, people will shift. Well, that's only true if we're coming back to people voting for them as a matter of assent. But if they're voting as a matter of dissent, none of that will matter, because if they want to blow up the system, they'll blow up the system.
And they may think that in all the questioning and grilling of her, they may just see that as bullying the outsider instead.
Well, and I think that's part of the way she responds to those questions.
Yeah.
There was plenty of grilling from Paul on the podcast, and Pauline Hanson will front up for more at the National Press Club in a couple of weeks as well. First time she's ever appeared, and that's great. I think it's terrific to see that sort of level of scrutiny. But what did you think about how she went in the podcast, your interview with her, and the decision to do the press club?
Yeah, well, she's got this tricky balance where she wants to remain very much in the political orbit, to be seen as the outside insurgent, as Waleed says. So she wants to be here and in people's minds, but she doesn't want to be right in people's, core calculus of how politics affects them, because then it brings in questions around policy and what she'll actually do in government. So she's trying to remain in the mix, but not at the core of Canberra political games. I think just worth riffing off what Waleed said, all of our assumptions on One Nation to date have been wrong. At every point we've said, where's the ceiling for One Nation, and they keep crashing through it.
Yep.
It may be the case that we are misdiagnosing this as a protest, that this is a permanent movement. There's a really interesting piece by James Campbell in the News Corp tabs today about how the reception Pauline is getting out in the streets. It's extraordinary. I saw her at the pub in Canberra and there are people stopping for selfies with her everywhere. Now, that might be a bubble or it might be a movement, not a protest. We do live in a low-growth, socially fractured country where a lot of people feel pessimistic about the future. We are not immune from what's happened in the US and the UK, and just like in those countries, pundits and people on the left thought this would go away, and it has not. So we may be in a permanent state.
The reason it gets cast as a protest is, I think it is a movement, but I don't think it's a movement that's based around specific policy proposals. It's a movement that is, and we've seen this with Trump, and it keeps revealing itself. It's a movement that is, as much as anything, aesthetic. Right? It's the way Trump presents. It's the posture he takes. It's these sorts of things. And so that's why you see Trump voters, I mean, OK, he's dipping in the polls, but you see Trump voters prepared to go wherever he goes. OK, we're doing this now. OK, that's where we're going. Because it is protest, but it's a protest movement.
Do you think Hanson
Hanson
has the same pull as Trump?
Well, she's been reflecting how people feel, and they say, she says what I feel, so I'm going to follow her. And as Waleed says, then that can mean she'll follow them. They'll follow her wherever she's willing to go.
All right, we're going to move on. Our panel, Waleed Aly, Karen Middleton, Paul Sakkal, back shortly with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer at large for the New Daily. I'm talking pictures this morning with photographer for AAP in the Federal Parliamentary Press Gallery, Mick Tsikas, mate, and a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Mike. Great to be here.
Mick, the changes to the AUKUS agreement have got some critics claiming it's subpar because they want to give us a substitute.
Yes.
And one of the events was the announcement of a public inquiry headed up by Peter Garrett.
Yep. We came this week and we saw it.
He's got a great head to photograph.
Oh, great head,
hasn't he?
Yeah, you can't miss.
It almost takes its own photo.
That's right.
The other person that broke ranks with the Labor Party was Ed Husick. I find Ed really good to photograph. He makes a good picture.
He does, and he's a good guy too.
Yeah. Alex Ellinghausen here has gone around and actually shown the bigger scene.
That corridor is a tiny corridor, and so it's hard to get a photo straight on, but coming around, you get something different.
It kind of places him in context. Yeah. I sometimes, Mick, wish that I was a cartoonist. They can just manipulate the visuals so well. David Rowe has got Tegseth here coming out of a subway. Here, buddy, I might have already taken a bite. He's giving him 2 subs.
Thank you. I hope those subs have good warranties.
Johannes Leek has Donald Trump here as a used sub salesman. I'm sure you'll find something in your price range.
And his pants are pulled down around his ankles.
Yeah, we need a sub that's only been driven once a week, really, don't we? Not to a war.
No.
I did love this. I had a Datsun 120Y about that colour.
That is great. I haven't seen one of those in ages.
Richard Miles here going, everything's fine, nothing to see here. Move along, please. Mick, we had a visit by the Solomon Islands Prime Minister. These events are very formulaic, aren't they?
They are. They'll go out, see the guard, come in, sign the visitors book, shake hands, and then walk off.
They've started to give out flags.
Yes, this is the second time. We like the little flags.
The Prime Minister does like to show visiting dignitaries up through the glass ceiling to the flagpole above. And you always have to be aware of the interactions when they come to the House of Parliament, because you have so much to watch in the House of Reps.
When I first came here, I didn't know what was going on. And watching things, I was missing things. But now I understand politics a lot better. I know what I'm looking for. We have to photograph essentially grey people in grey rooms, wearing grey clothes, saying grey things, and have to make it look interesting.
You have to do it in colour.
Yes.
We saw this week the new One Nation member for Farah sworn in. It's one of those occasions when they're actually nice to each other.
Yes.
Right? The One Nation senators came and watched, and they were like the proud... Parents?
Yes, they look very happy.
Yeah.
And good on them.
I like this because it wasn't less than about 20 minutes later that the briefing started. Like, hi, welcome. And then they start to sledge each other and on the
holding the knife behind your back while you're shaking hands. That's a great photo.
And there's the One Nation team, which, if the polls are to believe, there'll be a lot more of very shortly.
We shall see.
Julian Hill, the member for Bruce.
Yes.
It was his birthday and he decided to wear a birthday cap.
Yes, and I like the Sergeant-at-Arms behind him.
Yeah. The Speaker gave him a present, which was 94A.
Yes, out the door.
Happy birthday,
for
Julian.
An hour.
Mick, it's been a great pleasure unpicking this very busy week in federal parliament. Now, I hear your mum's a big fan of the segment.
Oh, she loves it. She loves it. And I'm going to give a shout out. Kalimera mana, nasi kala.
Oh, what about Spearsy?
Oh, bisu sisenak, Spearsy.
I wish I knew the Greek to say thank you, but thank you, Mick. Thank you, Mike. There you go. Waleed, of course you know. Some final observations. A quick one from me. It's almost certain the PM won't go to the World Cup game between the Socceroos and the US in Seattle in a couple of weeks. He was weighing it up and considering whether to go, but it now looks like Donald Trump may not even be there. It was hoped they'd have a more informal chat at the game, but doesn't look like that will
Still
be.
Still a 5% chance or no chance?
I think there's a teeny tiny chance, but at the moment, not the plan. Waleed.
Observation 1, Paul stole my look. I'm not happy about it. I just want to put that on the record.
Both look great.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Who wore it better?
Observation 2, the Solomon Islands PM came to Australia this week and announced a reset in relations, potentially leading to a treaty, the content of which we don't know. There's a lot of excitement that this is a turnaround where, Solomons were flirting with China, now maybe they're coming back into our sphere. This is a big rift in Solomon's politics. There is no firm commitment here on what the treaty would include. The key will be what happens after the PM has reviewed the security pact the Solomons currently has with China, which he said he'll review. That's the test, not anything that was announced this week. That is the test as to whether or not there is a serious realignment.
It's a really good point because he was asked, he said, I haven't read it yet, so he didn't commit to tearing it up. So that was, Karen.
Well, he did too, so I will too, very quickly. The crowd-funded inquiry into AUKUS, led by AUKUS critic Peter Garrett, is going to kick off this week in Melbourne on Thursday, and I'm told the first witness will be former Foreign Minister Gareth Evans, which is interesting. And secondly, on the National Anti-Corruption Commission and Robodebt, people will remember the Royal Commission referred 6 unnamed officials. The NAC decided not to investigate, got overruled and had to investigate. After that, the federal government provided legal funding to one of the unnamed officials to the tune of $32,000, but refused to say who it was. Very quietly on Thursday, now that that's all been resolved and we know who was investigated, 4 officials, Catherine Campbell, the former head of Human Services, and Scott Morrison, the government has revealed in a quietly tabled document that the funding of $32,000 did go to Scott Morrison.
There you go, Paul.
Yeah, the hand-to-hand combat with China in the Pacific is ferocious, and this government has a big agenda there to talk about, so I'm glad you raised it. Just a self-interested one, it was the Sydney Morning Herald's 195th anniversary on Tuesday, or a couple of weeks ago, but we had an event on Tuesday at which the Prime Minister and opposition leader both spoke. It's the oldest continuous newspaper in the country. Both of them gave really good speeches. The Prime Minister talked about how he reads the Sydney Morning Herald hard copy first thing in the morning at the Lodge, and both leaders committed to the news media bargaining incentive, which is this scheme to draw money out of the tech firms like Meta and Google to fund Australian journalism, despite the Trump administration being fervently against it. So that's a good bipartisan thing.
I like that he's still on the hard copy of the newspaper.
Old school.
Old school.
He doesn't like when News Review, the features section, is cut off in the middle by the business section or My Career. So if you're at the printing press...
That is no good. That is no good.
We can do a whole other show on that topic, I'm sure. Look, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Finally, public servants don't often enjoy being grilled at Senate estimates, and it seems some of the politicians don't want to be there either. Labor's Raf Ciccone let slip what he really thinks. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
We're going to break for lunch, and I'll see everyone back here in 1 hour. Thank you for that.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.